The Galvian station was a busy place. It floated at the edge of 3-star systems, wide and round like a pressed coin, full of corridors that never quite smelled the same twice. Dozens of species lived and worked there. Merchants, soldiers, diplomats, engineers. The station had its own rhythm, its own quiet rules. Most people followed them without thinking. Aaron did not look like someone important. He was 22 years old, slight in build, with short brown hair that never sat flat no matter how many times he pushed it down. He wore a plain gray student uniform with a small earth patch on the left shoulder. He carried a battered data pad everywhere. He ate his meals alone at the end of the long table in the common hall, reading while he chewed, unbothered by the noise around him. He was on the station for one reason. A research placement. 12 months studying cross-species communication patterns under the guidance of a retired diplomat. It was not a glamorous assignment. It was, in fact, quite boring most of the time. But Aaron liked quiet work. He liked watching. He liked understanding how things connected beneath the surface. He had been there 4 months when Commander Vorik arrived. Vorik came from the Keth, a large, reptilian species known for their military record and their firm belief in the hierarchy of strength. They were tall, broad-shouldered, with scaled skin the color of dark stone and eyes that caught the light like polished copper. They had fought in 3 major conflicts across the outer systems. They had won 2 of them. They carried that history in the way they walked, slow, deliberate, taking up exactly as much space as they pleased. Vorik was their highest-ranked officer aboard the station. He had arrived with a small crew to oversee a weapons treaty review, a formality, his superiors had said. He treated it like one. He spent his first week making clear, in small and consistent ways, exactly where he believed each species stood. He was polite to the Yvari. Respectful to the Drenathi elders. Dismissive of the Pelori traders. And when it came to humans, he did not bother hiding what he thought. He called them soft. He called them fragile. He said, more than once in the officers' lounge, that humans had reached the stars by accident and would eventually drift back to their small wet planet when the rest of the galaxy stopped being patient with them. Most humans on the station heard this and said nothing. They had heard worse. They went back to their work. Aaron heard it too. He noted it. He filed it away in the same quiet part of his mind where he kept everything else. And then he went back to his data pad. It happened on a Tuesday, station time. Aaron was sitting in the main corridor hub, the wide open area near the central atrium where 4 main passages met. It was a common spot for people to stop, rest, eat a quick meal, check messages. Aaron had claimed a seat near the curved wall, legs crossed, datapad on his knee, working through a set of communication logs from a Drenathi trade meeting 3 years prior. He was not in anyone's way. He had checked. There was open space in every direction. Vorik came through with 2 of his officers, moving fast, talking loudly about the treaty review session they had just left. They were not watching where they were going. Or rather, Vorik was not. His officers were watching him. Aaron saw him coming. He had enough time to look up, to register the direction, to consider moving. He did not move. He was not in the path. There was no reason to move. Vorik walked close, too close, the way he always did with humans, as if testing how quickly they would flinch. His shoulder clipped Aaron's datapad. The datapad clattered to the floor. Aaron reached down for it. And then Vorik stopped. He looked down at Aaron, reaching for the drop device, and something shifted behind those copper-colored eyes. A decision was made. A small, ugly one. He struck Aaron across the side of the head. Not a punch, more a heavy, open-handed blow. The kind meant to humiliate rather than injure. The kind that said, "You are beneath my notice, and I will still remind you of it." The sound of it carried. Aaron's head snapped to the side. He caught himself with one hand on the floor. For a moment, he was still. The corridor went quiet the way deep space goes quiet. Complete. Total. Vorac's 2 officers said nothing. 3 Pelori traders standing nearby said nothing. A pair of young Keth soldiers further down the passage looked over, then looked away. 2 Drenathi elders near the atrium entrance did not look away. They watched. Their expressions did not change, but something in their stillness was different from the others. Aaron straightened up slowly. He picked up his datapad with one hand. He checked the screen, a small crack in the lower corner, but the display still worked. He tucked it under his arm. Then he stood all the way up and looked at Vorac directly. He did not look angry. He did not look frightened. He looked the way a person looks when they have just confirmed something they already suspected. Vorac stared back. He was waiting for something. A flinch. A sound. A step backward. Some proof of what he believed humans to be. Aaron gave him none of it. He held the eye contact for 2 full seconds, long enough to be deliberate, short enough to be calm, and then he turned and walked away. Steady pace. Straight back. No rush. Vorac laughed. It was a short sound, sharp and satisfied. One of his officers made a low noise that passed for amusement in Keth company. The corridor slowly unfroze. Sounds returned. People began moving again. But the 2 Drenathi elders near the atrium did not move for a long moment. One of them, old enough to have attended the first Galvian diplomatic sessions 40 years prior, watched Aaron until he disappeared around the far bend of the corridor. His companion leaned close and said something in their own language. The elder nodded once, slowly, and replied in a low voice. In the common tongue, it would have translated roughly as, "He did not run." The other Drenathi considered this. Then said, "None of them ever do." And then they walked on. Aaron returned to his assigned study room. He set his datapad on the desk. He sat down. He looked at the small crack in the lower corner of the screen for a moment. Then he opened his communication log and resumed reading from exactly the line where he had stopped. He did not report the incident. He did not tell his supervising diplomat. He did not message anyone back on Earth. He did not bring it up at dinner or in passing or at any point in the days that followed. He simply went back to work. And on the station, in the careful, watchful way that large communities notice things without saying them aloud, people noticed. Nobody called a meeting. There was no announcement, no letter passed around, no quiet gathering in a back room where someone stood up and gave a speech. Nothing like that happened. Nothing like that needed to happen. Word simply moved, the way word always moves on a station, through shared meals and corridor nods and the small, sideways glances that carry more meaning than sentences. By the following morning, every human on Galvian Station knew what had happened in the central atrium. They knew who had done it. They knew that Aaron had not reported it, had not made a sound, had simply picked up his datapad and walked away. They did not discuss it openly. They went to their stations. They did their work. They were professional and punctual and completely correct in every official way. But something changed. Donna had been on Galvian Station for 6 years. She was the senior human engineer. 41 years old, stocky, with calloused hands and a habit of carrying a small tool kit on her belt even on her days off. She knew the station the way a person knows their own home. She knew which corridor panels hummed too loud in the mornings, which water recycler needed its filter tapped twice before it ran clean, which power relay on sublevel 4 would trip if you ran 3 systems off it at the same time. She also knew which systems on Vorac's docked ship had been quietly added to her team's informal maintenance list. It had started 8 months ago, before Vorac arrived, when his ship had first been assigned the docking port. The ship's own engineers were competent but stretched thin. Donna's team had noticed a minor coolant irregularity during a routine station check and fixed it without being asked. The Keth engineers had been grateful in their own stiff way. After that, a few small things became a quiet habit. Nothing official. Nothing logged. Just good neighbors keeping an eye out. On the morning after the atrium incident, Donna reviewed her team's informal task list. She deleted the entries related to Vorex's ship. Quietly. No explanation written beside them. She simply removed them and moved on to the next item. Her team watched her do it. Nobody asked why. Sean ran the human medical bay on sublevel 2. He was 34, lean, unhurried in the way that good medics tend to be. He had a calm face that people trusted immediately, and he gave that trust good reason to exist. He had treated Keth crew members before, twice in the past 3 months alone, once for a pressure burn and once for something that turned out to be a stress reaction presenting as chest pain. He had stayed late both times. He had followed up the next day without being asked. The morning after the atrium incident, a junior Keth officer came by the medical bay with a minor joint complaint. Not serious. The kind of thing that takes 10 minutes to assess and treat. Sean looked at his schedule. He was technically between shifts, a personal window he kept free for study and rest. He told the officer, politely and without any visible emotion, that the bay was currently in an off-duty period and that they were welcome to register for a formal appointment during the next open slot, which was in approximately 9 hours. The officer blinked. Started to say something. Then looked at Sean's face, calm, professional, giving nothing, and left. Sean made himself a cup of tea and sat down with a book. The small things were the hardest to name. That was the part that confused Vorex's crew first, because they could not point at any single failure. Everything official still ran. Formal requests were processed. Required services were rendered on schedule. If anyone had looked at the station logs, everything would have appeared completely normal. But the texture of daily life had shifted in ways that did not show up in logs. The human kitchen staff still served meals. But the extra portions that had quietly appeared at the end of service, the ones left out with no comment for whoever was still eating late, stopped appearing. The human corridor workers still cleaned. But the soft greeting that had come with it each morning, the small nod or the quick word, was gone. The 2 human communications officers still routed all transmissions correctly. But the informal heads-up they used to give Keth officers before a scheduled signal test, the friendly advance warning that had saved several crew members from being startled at their consoles, simply stopped. None of it was reportable. None of it was even definable, exactly. It was the absence of warmth. And warmth, it turns out, is very hard to describe until it is gone. Lieutenant Heron was the first of Vorex's officers to feel it clearly. He was a practical Keth, less interested in hierarchy than most of his rank, and he had developed a comfortable working relationship with several of the human engineers over the past weeks. They had shared a table at meals. Exchanged technical observations. He had learned 2 human expressions that made him feel proud when he used them correctly. On the second morning after the atrium incident, he sat down at the usual table and found it empty. The human engineers were seated across the room, not in protest, not making a show of it. Just elsewhere. Talking among themselves. Heron ate alone. He told himself it meant nothing. On the third morning, he tried to ask Donna a casual question about a power reading he had noticed on their shared docking systems. Donna answered him. Correctly, fully, with all the relevant information. But the answer was so precise and so contained that it felt like reading from a manual. There was no extra word. No light tone. Nothing that a superior officer could complain about and nothing that felt like a conversation. Heron went back to his quarters and sat for a while. He thought about what had changed. He ran through the past several days carefully, the way a good officer reviews a situation. And he arrived, slowly and uncomfortably, at the central atrium. At the sound of that blow. At the human student who had not flinched. He did not go to Vorik. Not yet. He was not sure how to put into words what he was beginning to understand. Vorik himself noticed nothing. Or if he did, he named it as something else, the natural distance between species, the ordinary coldness of a working station. He moved through his days with the same heavy confidence as always. He attended his treaty sessions. He reviewed his reports. He ate his meals. But once, on the fourth evening, he reached for his water unit and found it running slower than usual. A small blockage in the filter line. The kind of thing that fixed itself in 10 minutes if you knew which panel to tap. He waited for someone to notice and correct it. No one came. He went to sleep with the unit still running slow. And in sublevel 2, in the quiet of the off-duty medical bay, Sean turned a page in his book. It started with a sound. A low, uneven hum coming from the rear section of Vorik's ship. Not loud enough to trigger any automatic alert. Not sharp enough to feel urgent. Just a steady, slightly wrong vibration that lived beneath everything else and made the back of your teeth ache if you stayed near it too long. Vorik's chief engineer, a broad-shouldered Keth named Dorith, found it on the 5th morning. He ran his standard diagnostics. The results came back inconclusive. The system was reading within acceptable range on paper, but the sound said otherwise. Dorith had been an engineer long enough to trust sounds over numbers. He traced it back to the thermal regulation relay in the ship's secondary power grid. A slow build-up. Pressure in the coolant line had been climbing, by a very small amount, for what looked like several weeks. The rate was gradual enough that the automated systems had not flagged it. But left alone, it would reach a critical point. Not immediately. But soon enough. Dorith stared at the readout for a long time. Then he remembered something. 8 months ago, before they had even boarded the station, a human engineer had spotted a coolant irregularity and corrected it quietly. He had not thought about it much at the time. A favor. A small thing. He had noted it, filed it, and moved on. He pulled up the old maintenance record. Read it carefully. And understood, with a sinking feeling, that what he was looking at now was the same system. The humans had been watching it. Adjusting it. Keeping it inside a safe range with small, regular corrections that never appeared in any formal log because they had never been formally requested. Those corrections had stopped 5 days ago. Dorith went to find Donna. He located her in the main engineering bay, running a calibration check on a station atmospheric unit. She was focused, efficient, working through her checklist with the quiet ease of someone completely at home in their work. Dorith explained the situation. Clearly and without any attempt at pride, he was a practical engineer and practical engineers do not let pride sit between them and a working system. Donna listened. She nodded at the right moments. When he finished, she set down her calibration tool and looked at him with a perfectly even expression. She told him she understood the concern. She told him that any formal maintenance request for a docked vessel had to be submitted through the station's technical services office, reviewed by the duty supervisor, assigned a priority rating, and scheduled accordingly. She told him the current wait time for non-emergency external vessel maintenance was 11 days. Dorith stared at her. He said, "This could become critical before 11 days. Donna said she was sorry to hear that. She told him that if the situation met the threshold for emergency classification, he was welcome to submit an emergency request form, which would be reviewed within 48 hours. She picked up her calibration tool and went back to work. Dorith stood in the middle of the engineering bay for a moment, surrounded by the ordinary sounds of a functioning station, feeling something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt small. He filed the emergency request. He filled out every field carefully, attached Dorothy's diagnostic report, and submitted it through the correct channel. A confirmation message came back within the hour. His request had been received. It was under review. He would be contacted within 48 hours. Dorith returned to the ship and began doing what he could with his own team. They were capable. They were not without skill. But the tools they carried were designed for field repairs, not for the kind of precise, sustained adjustment the relay system needed. They managed to slow the pressure buildup. They could not stop it. The hum continued. On the 7th day, Lieutenant Heron got sick. It came on quickly, the way illness sometimes does in pressurized environments, a headache first, then a deep fatigue that settled into his bones like weight. By midday he could not stand without the room tilting. By evening he had a fever that his own ship's medical kit was not equipped to diagnose properly. The Keth had their own medic aboard. But their medic was trained for battlefield injuries, cuts, burns, broken bones, the clean and visible damage of combat. What Heron had was something internal, something that needed proper diagnostic equipment and someone who knew how to read the results. The best diagnostic equipment on the station was in the human medical bay. Vorik went himself. He did not send an officer. He walked down to sublevel 2 and stood at the entrance of the human medical bay and spoke to the duty attendant, a young human woman named Gail, barely 25, who looked up at him from behind her desk with a calm and professional expression. Vorik explained that his lieutenant was ill and required diagnostic assessment. Gail told him that the human medical bay's current off-duty period had begun 2 hours ago. She told him that their services were available to all station residents during posted operating hours. She told him that their next open period began in the morning. She offered him a printed copy of their schedule. Vorik looked at her. He was a commander who had faced enemy vessels in open space. He had negotiated treaties with species who had, within living memory, been at war with his own. He had walked into rooms where everyone wanted him dead and come out the other side. He did not know what to do with Gail. He said, "My officer needs help now." Gail said she understood. She said that in cases of immediate life-threatening emergency, the station had a central emergency response unit on level 1 that operated around the clock and was outside the jurisdiction of any individual bay's operating hours. She slid a small card across the desk with the contact information on it. She looked at him the whole time with the same calm face. No anger in it. No satisfaction. Just a person doing her job to the precise edge of its requirements and not one step further. Vorik took the card. He left. In the ship that night, Heron lay in his bunk with a wet cloth across his forehead, which was the best his crewmates could offer him. The hum from the rear section moved through the walls. One of the younger soldiers had taken to sleeping with a pillow pressed over his ear. Two of Vorik's officers sat together in the small common area of the ship, speaking quietly. They had fought in the same conflict 7 years ago. They had crossed debris fields and held positions under fire and not once looked at each other the way they were looking at each other now. One of them said, "I do not understand what is happening." The other one was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think we insulted someone we did not know how to see." The first officer looked at the wall. Somewhere behind it, the hum continued its low, patient note. He said, "How do we fix it?" The other one had no answer. And that, more than the hum, more than the fever, more than the 11-day waiting list, that silence was the thing that frightened them most. Ren was old. Not in the way that made people uncomfortable, not frail or slow or difficult to follow. Old in the way that certain things become old. Worn smooth. Settled into themselves. She was Drenethi, one of the two elders who had been standing near the atrium entrance on the day of the incident. She had seen the blow land. She had watched Aaron walk away. She had said nothing then, and she had said nothing in the days since. But she had been watching. She sent Vorik a message on the evening of the 7th day. It was brief. It asked if he would join her for tea in her quarters the following morning. It was worded as an invitation. It was not one. Vorik knew enough about Drenethi diplomats to understand the difference. He sent back a confirmation and went to sleep listening to the hum in the walls. Her quarters were small and very tidy. A low table near the window. 2 seats. A pot of something warm already poured when Vorik arrived. The view through the window showed the outer docking ring of the station and, beyond it, the slow dark of open space. Ren gestured to the seat across from her. Vorik sat. He was too large for the chair and he knew it, and she gave no indication that she noticed. She did not begin with the incident. She did not begin with Vorik at all. She began with a question. She asked him how long he believed Galvian Station had been running. Vorik said he knew the answer. 43 years, since the first joint construction agreement. Ren nodded. She asked him who had built the atmospheric processing system on level 3. Vorik did not know. She told him. Humans. The original design had been a collaborative effort, but the atmospheric system, the one that quietly kept the air on the station breathable for 11 different species simultaneously, had been a human solution to a problem that 3 other engineering teams had failed to solve. It had been running without significant failure for 40 years. She asked him who maintained the cross-species dietary database used by every kitchen on the station, the one that ensured no species was accidentally served something toxic. Vorik did not know that either. Humans, she said. A single human nutritionist had built it in the station's 2nd year and her successors had updated it ever since. She asked him who had mediated the Pelori trade dispute 6 years ago, when it had come within 2 sessions of collapsing into something much worse. A human diplomat, Vorik said. He had known that one. Ren nodded slowly. She wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at him. She said, "Do you see the shape of what I am describing?" Vorik was quiet for a moment. He was not a stupid creature. He had not reached his rank by failing to understand things when they were placed clearly in front of him. He was beginning to see the shape. He did not like it. He said, "Humans are useful. Many species are useful." Ren said, "Yes. But there is a difference between a species that helps because it is required to, and a species that helps because it chooses to. One of those can be managed with contracts and agreements and formal arrangements. The other cannot." She set her cup down. She said, "The Keth have treaties with many species. You have obligations and schedules and signed documents that guarantee certain services. Tell me, how many of those services kept your ship running smoothly this past week?" Vorik said nothing. Ren said, "The humans on this station are not contracted to maintain your coolant relay. They are not obligated to greet your officers in the corridors. They are not required to leave extra food at the end of service or to warn your crew before signal tests or to treat your people during their own rest hours. None of that is in any agreement. None of that appears in any official record." She paused. She said, "And yet your ship functioned better when they did those things than it does now when they have simply stopped." The room was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, a small transport vessel moved slowly past the docking ring, its running lights blinking in the dark. Vorik said, "They are punishing me." Ren looked at him. There was no sharpness in her expression. No satisfaction. Just the even patience of someone who had explained difficult things to difficult people for a very long time. She said, "No. They are not punishing you. Punishment requires intention. Punishment is a choice made in response to something. What the humans are doing is much simpler than that. They are doing exactly their jobs. Nothing more. The punishment, Commander, is only what it feels like when the extra stops." Vorik sat with that for a moment. He thought about Aaron. He had not thought about the student much since the incident. The boy had been small, unimportant, a passing moment. But he thought about him now. About the way he had steadied himself. About the way he had looked up and held eye contact without a word. About the way he had simply turned and walked away. He said, "The student never reported me. Ren said, no. He said, he never made any complaint. He never told anyone. Ren said. Not formally. No. Vorik was quiet again. He was working through something slowly, the way you work through something when you already know the answer and do not want to arrive at it. He said, then how did they all know? Ren picked up her cup again. She said, because they are always watching, Commander. Not with suspicion. Not with hostility. That is simply what humans do. They pay attention. They notice. They remember. She looked at him steadily. She said, Aaron did not need to report you. He did not need to threaten you or confront you or take any action against you at all. He picked up his data pad and went back to his work. And the most extraordinary thing about that, the thing that I think you are only now beginning to understand, is that it was enough. It was more than enough. Vorik set his cup down. It made a small sound against the low table. He said, the most dangerous thing a human can do is stop caring. Ren said, yes. Exactly that. He said, we have treaties with 100 species. Agreements. Guarantees. And none of them are worth what one human engineer does before breakfast because she feels like being helpful. Ren said nothing. She did not need to. Vorik looked out the window at the dark. His ship was out there, somewhere along the docking ring, humming its low uncomfortable note into the walls. Heron was still in his bunk. The 11-day waiting list was still running. He said, quietly, more to himself than to her, I hit a student over a dropped data pad. Ren said, yes. You did. The silence after that was not comfortable. But it was honest. And Ren, who had spent 40 years working with every species the galaxy had managed to put in a room together, believed that honest silence was usually where the important things began. She refilled his cup. He did not leave for another hour. Vorik stood outside his own ship for a long time before he moved. He had come down to the docking level with the intention of going aboard, reviewing the latest diagnostic report from Dorith, checking on Heron. The usual business of command. But he had stopped at the bottom of the access ramp and had not gone any further. The hum was audible even out here, faint but present, moving through the deck plating beneath his boots. He stood there and thought about what Ren had said. Then he turned around and walked in the other direction. He did not tell anyone where he was going. He left his rank sash on the hook inside the docking entrance, a long piece of deep gray fabric with the Keth commander's insignia stitched along its edge. He had worn it every day for 11 years. He folded it once and left it there and walked out into the main corridor in a plain uniform that made him look like any other large Keth crew member going about ordinary business. It felt strange. Lighter than he expected. Not comfortable, just lighter. He had looked up Aaron's quarter assignment in the station directory that morning, after leaving Ren's room. Sublevel 3, Corridor 7, Room 14. Student Residential Section. He had noted it and said nothing to himself about why he was noting it. Now he walked there. The student residential section was quiet in the mid-morning. Most people were at their placements or in the study rooms. The corridors were narrow compared to the officer levels, the doors closer together, the lighting slightly warmer. It smelled faintly of coffee, a human smell that Vorik had never paid attention to before and noticed sharply now. He found room 14. He stood in front of the door. He had faced enemy commanders across negotiating tables. He had delivered death notifications to families. He had stood in front of superior officers and admitted strategic failures that had cost lives. He was not a creature who frightened easily and he knew it. He raised his hand and knocked. There was a pause. Then the sound of movement. Then the door opened. Aaron stood in the doorway in a plain off-duty shirt and trousers, datapad in hand, the same battered one with the small crack in the lower corner of the screen. He looked at Vorik. His expression did not close over with fear or harden with anger. It simply became still and careful in the way it had been in the atrium, that particular human stillness that Vorik was beginning to understand meant something very different from what he had originally read it as. It did not mean weakness. It meant that the person was thinking clearly and had decided to keep themselves level until they knew what they were dealing with. Aaron said, "Commander." Vorik said, "I would like to speak with you. If you are willing." A pause. Then Aaron stepped back from the door and opened it wider. He gestured to the small chair near the desk. He himself sat on the edge of the bed, datapad set aside, hands resting on his knees. He waited. Vorik sat down in the chair. It was too small, as chairs always were. He did not make any comment about it. He looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked at Aaron directly. He said, "I struck you. In the corridor. 8 days ago." Aaron said, "Yes." Vorik said, "There was no justification for it. You were not in my path. You did not speak to me. You did nothing that warranted what I did. I struck you because I believed your species was beneath my concern. Because I believed that nothing I did to a human would carry any consequence." He stopped. He made himself continue. He said, "I was wrong about all of it. I have been wrong about your species since before I boarded this station. What I did to you was not the action of a commander. It was not the action of someone who deserved their rank. It was a small and ugly thing, and I have thought about it every day since Ren sat me down and helped me see what I could not see on my own." He said, "I am asking you to forgive me. Not because it will fix my ship or clear the waiting list or bring my officer's fever down. I am asking because it is the right thing to ask and because I do not know any other place to start." Then he stopped talking and waited. Aaron was quiet for a moment. He looked at Vorik the way he looked at things he was studying, carefully, without rush, taking in the full picture before forming a conclusion. He looked at the plain uniform. The absent rank sash. The way Vorik's large hands were resting on his knees, not crossed, not positioned to project anything. Just resting there. Open. Aaron said, "Can I ask you something first?" Vorik said, "Yes." Aaron said, "When you hit me, what did you think would happen?" Vorik considered the question honestly. He said, "I thought nothing would happen. I thought you would look away. I thought you would move faster next time you saw me coming." Aaron nodded slowly. He said, "And when I didn't?" Vorik said, "I thought it still meant nothing. I thought your stillness was just a different kind of fear." Aaron said, "It wasn't." Vorik said, "I know that now." Aaron looked at him for another moment. Then something in his face settled, not into warmth exactly, not yet, but into something that was at least open. The careful stillness eased slightly at the edges. He said, "I accept your apology, Commander." He said it plainly, without making Vorik wait for it, without drawing it out. Just cleanly and directly, the way you hand something to someone who needs it. Vorik let out a slow breath. He had not realized he had been holding one. Then Aaron stood up. He crossed the small room and stopped in front of Vorik and extended his right hand, palm open, fingers together, held out at the space between them. Vorik looked at it. He had seen the gesture before in records and briefings. He knew its name. But he had never had one extended to him personally, and he was not entirely sure of the mechanics. He said, "I know what this is called. I am not certain I am doing it correctly." Aaron said, "You take my hand in yours. You hold it for a moment. Then you let go." He said it quietly, without any trace of amusement. Just the information, offered simply. Vorik reached out. His hand was nearly twice the size of Aaron's. He took it carefully, the way you pick up something you do not want to damage. He held it for a moment. Then he let go. Aaron said, A handshake means we are starting from the same place. It means whatever was before, we are both choosing to begin again from here. Vorik looked at his own hand for a moment after Aaron released it. He said, "That is a great deal of meaning for such a small gesture." Aaron said, "Humans put a lot of meaning into small things." Vorik left the room 10 minutes later. He walked back through the narrow corridor, past the smell of coffee and the warm lighting, back toward the main station levels. He did not rush. That afternoon, Donna received a formally submitted maintenance cancellation for the waiting list request, followed immediately by a new message, a direct personal note from Vorik, written plainly, asking if she and her team would be willing to return to the informal arrangement on their own terms and at their own discretion. He wrote that he understood if they declined. He wrote that he would not consider it a grievance if they did. Donna read it twice. She showed it to Sean without comment. Sean read it. He nodded once. By the next morning, the hum in the walls of Vorik's ship had stopped. Heron's fever broke by midday. The extra portions appeared again at the end of meal service. The corridor workers nodded their small nods. The advance warning came before the signal test. The station returned to itself. Quietly, without ceremony, the way it had always worked best. Vorik completed his treaty review and left Galvian Station 19 days later. He retrieved his rank sash from the hook at the docking entrance. He put it on. He walked aboard his ship. Before the docking seal released, he stood at the small viewport in his quarters and looked at the station for a moment. Somewhere inside it, a human student was sitting at the end of a long table with a cracked datapad, reading, unbothered by the noise around him. Vorik looked at his right hand. He thought about what Aaron had said. Whatever was before, we are both choosing to begin again from here. He kept that thought for the rest of his life. In negotiating rooms and command briefings and the long quiet stretches between star systems. Whenever he was tempted to measure a species by its size or its silence or what it appeared to be on the surface, he thought about a young man in a plain gray uniform who had picked up a cracked datapad and walked away without a word. And he kept his hands to himself.